Thank you, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Windsor-Carriby Local Planning Panel on the 2nd of March 2022. I declare the meeting open at 3:30 p.m. My name is Julie Walsh and I'm the chair of today's panel meeting. Also sitting on the panel today are expert members Heather Wharton on my left, Scott Barwick on my right, and on my far left, community member Richard Colley. Acknowledgement of country. Windsor-Carriby Shire Council acknowledges the Gundungurra and Tharawal people as the traditional custodians of the land we now call Windsor-Carriby Shire. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present here today. The meeting is being live streamed to Council's website and the recording will be made available on the website after the meeting. Could I ask everyone to please turn their mobile phones to silent? There are no apologies. There are some declarations of interest. I have to declare a non-pecuniary less than significant interest in item 6.1, review of determination for 5 Alice Street, Mittagong. Graham McKee, the solicitor for the applicant, is known to me as a solicitor practising in the Land Environment Court. Over 4 years ago at a previous law firm, I had a number of cases and knew him as a professional colleague. I have no other professional or personal relationship with Mr McKee, and therefore the interest is non-pecuniary and non-significant, and I will remain in the meeting and take part in the voting therein. Brian McDonald, the heritage expert for the applicant, is also known to me as a heritage, urban design and town planning expert. I engaged him on behalf of clients in a number of Land Environment Court cases when I was at my previous law firm over 4 years ago. I also sat with Mr McDonald on the Cumberland Local Planning Panel in 2016 and 2017. I have no professional or personal relationship with Mr McDonald, and therefore the interest is non-pecuniary and non-significant, and I will remain in the meeting and take part on the voting on the item. Heather Wharton declared a non-pecuniary less than significant interest in item 6.1, review of determination for 5 Alice Street, Mittagong. The structural engineer acting for the applicant, Harrison and Morris Consulting Proprietors, provided structural engineering drawings for her home extensions, but this was in 2013 and she's had no further contact with the firm since that date. She has no other professional or personal relationship with the firm, and therefore the interest is non-pecuniary and non-significant, and she will remain in the meeting and take part on the voting. Scott Barwick declared a non-pecuniary less than significant interest in item 6.1, review of determination for 5 Alice Street, Mittagong. Mr Lee is known to him on a professional basis, as approximately 3 years ago he provided backlog planning and service to the firm of which Mr Barwick is a director. He has no professional or personal relationship with Mr Lee, and therefore the interest is non-pecuniary and non-significant, and he will remain in the meeting and take part in the voting. The procedure for the meeting will be, so the Council website contains a copy of the operational guidelines for the panel meetings, but I'll summarise the most important points. All panel members have read the business paper and received a detailed briefing from Council staff. They have also inspected the sites. The panel is charged with determining the review of determination application item 6.1 and providing advice to Council on the planning proposals on the agenda today, which are 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3. There are 2 registered speakers for item 6.1. There are no speakers for the other items. We will hear from Mr Jeff Wood, the objector first, followed by Mr Scott Lee, the applicant's consultant. Normally the limit is 3 minutes, but today, because there are only the 2 speakers, I'll allow them each 5 minutes. Once the speaker has spoken, the panel members may have questions, and I may seek a response to any issue raised from the relevant Council officer. Once a speaker has spoken, they will not be permitted to speak again unless it is in response to a question by the chair or other panel member. When we've heard from all speakers, we'll move into closed session to deliberate, and we'll return to the public meeting to announce our decisions, and that will be live streamed. The minutes of the meeting will be placed on the Council website within 2 business days. As I indicated, there are no speakers for items 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3, so we'll consider those in the closed session at the conclusion of the public meeting. So in relation to item 6.1, if we could start with Mr Jeff Wood. If you could come forward, Mr Wood. Please take a seat. And Mr Wood, I should state that the panel members did receive your 2 videos showing the location of the site and the surrounds, and we've been out there. It was a bit wet, but we did go out and have a look at the site and the surrounding areas. So if you could just, could I just get your address, Mr Wood? 41 Alfred Street, Mittagong. Thank you. If you could just please proceed.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to address the panel today regarding the proposed development at number 3 Phyllis Street, Mittagong, which was formerly the St Joseph's Convent. My wife and I are the owners of number 41 Alfred Street, and we've put forward, on behalf of the community, some of the reasons for the rejection of this proposed development. It's noted that the development has been listed as a reassessment, which allows the panel to reject this application using some of the following reasons. Firstly, it is out of character with the local area. The 2011, the Affordable Rental Housing SEP was amended by state government to include at Division 1, Section A, and also at Division 3, 30A, the character of local area test. This allows the consent authority to reject a development proposal that is considered not compatible with the character of the local area. The subject land is part of the Mittagong Conservation Area, containing many original 1800s dwellings in Alfred Street, as seen from the submitted video. There's St Paul's Presbyterian Church with the former Manson Hall in Alice Street, the original 1800s St Michael's Catholic School and Church, plus the many dwellings that front Alexandra Square, and of course the structure of the former St Joseph's Convent. The character of local area test was listed at Division 330A of the Affordable Rental Housing SEP. It states the consent authority must not consent to development unless it has taken into consideration whether the design of the development is compatible with the character of the local area. This development fails that test to the physical impact on the surrounding area, and its appearance is not in harmony with the buildings around it or the character of the local street. 1. The proposed 2-storey and 3-storey tower structures will dominate the surrounding historic dwellings, with the physical impacts being unacceptable and out of character with both the surrounding single-storey dwellings that have existed since the late 1800s, as well as when viewed from Alexandra Square opposite. The style of the box-like structures proposed for the development have little architectural merit, instead resembling a tower-like design which is in complete contrast with the ornate single-storey dwellings in this area, and therefore not in harmony with the surrounding dwellings, which have been maintained by generations of owners to retain the unique characters that exist there today. The surrounding dwellings are designed for the average single family, consisting of 2 adults and 2.4 children, a total of 6 adults and 8 children, as opposed to the proposed development, which is capable of housing 96 residents, plus those occupying the separate cottages. This density is completely out of character with the local area. The proposed development is only providing 25 car parking spaces for those 96 residents, which is 1 space for every 4 adults. So the overflow parking will be in the surrounding streets. This was even stated in the Statement of Environmental Effects, which suggests the surrounding streets should be used for additional parking. As the entrance to the boarding house blocks are in Alfred Street, human nature is such that most cars will tend to park in Alfred Street. This saturation of cars in both Alice and Albert Streets, coupled with the coming and going from early morning to late night, will create noise levels which will be out of character with the existing, quiet and currently enjoyed in the local area. It should be noted that the nearest public transport is a bus service which finishes at 6 p.m. weekdays and stops midday Saturday, with nothing on a Sunday. And the trains run on a country timetable, so public transport is very restricted. There is no provision for visitor parking, which will further exacerbate the lack of parking spaces available, creating a parking lot streetscape which is totally out of character with the local area. The design of the boarding house units is stated as being approximately 25 square metres, or the equivalent size of a couple of garden sheds. Boarders living in such cramped quarters who are surrounded by other boarders will inevitably lead to social tension and disputes, which is contrary to the character of the quiet existence enjoyed by the surrounding residents. In summary, the development fails the local character test, and therefore, in accordance with clauses 16A and 30A of the SEP, the consent authority must not consent to the proposed development. It is not compatible with the character of the local area. Secondly, the development exceeds the floor space ratio. The density of the development in the R3 zone exceeds the Mittagong DCP floor space ratio limit of 0.6 to 1. which is therefore the maximum stated in the affordable rental housing step, giving council the ability to refuse a development application on those grounds. The applicant has proposed a floor space ratio of 0.8 to 1, which equates to an in excess of 14 units over the maximum limit, and it tends to utilise land contained in the adjoining R2 zone to facilitate this development. The precedent of allowing the use of land building in the R2 zone to benefit the development in the R3 zone is one which council needs to consider carefully. By reducing the size of the central tower block, the reduced on-site parking demand would eliminate the need to build a proposed car park extension within the R2 zone land. This would also remove the concrete structure, roof structure, of the underground car park, which is impacting on the open space available to those two cottages in the R2 zone. In conclusion, we're not totally opposed to the development of the old convent, which was erected in 1926 by the nuns of St Joseph, an order set up on St Mary MacKillop. We just would like something that is in keeping with the surrounding area and complies with the relevant state and council legislation. I thank you for this opportunity to express the community's deep concerns regarding this development, because if it is approved, it will destroy the nature of this beautiful area for generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Wood. Just wait there to see if there's any questions. Mr Barwick, did you have any questions?
Yes, you mentioned the physical impacts, and you talked about this. You spoke about the parking and the visual impacts. Was there any other impacts that you were worried about besides the parking and the visual impact?
Well, it'll be the parking. There'll be the general coming and going of the night time, people getting in and out of cars. There could be a lot of things that will be generated out of this, and we would just like to have something that's a little bit less than what they're proposing, so those impacts will be lessened. I mean, I've chose to live there because it is a nice historical area, and we just don't want to see that destroyed. At the moment, there's only probably 4 cars get parked out on the streets at the night time. I've just built a bigger garage to house my cars off street.
Okay, thank you.
Mr Colley, did you have any questions? No. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, panel members. A few comments and then hopefully be able to answer any questions you may have.
Actually, sorry, before you start, we have also received additional material that has been forwarded on your behalf and also from Mr McKee. So.
Right, thank you very much. March 21, a year ago almost, DA 210195 was recommended for approval subject to some standard conditions. That DA is completely consistent with the discussions and the agreements reached with the council and its representatives during the Section 34 Land Environment Conferencing that had resulted from an earlier development proposal for the site. When DA 210195 was presented to council, the council has determined on their own initiative to impose deferred commencement conditions which varied the effect of the approval. The applicant therefore put forward a review application, the panel is now considering, to specifically address those matters and in doing so also clarify other matters of relevance. The Section 8.2 Assessment Report recommendation now presented to the panel achieves the outcome of approving the heritage restoration works in the 48 boarding room development. This is a positive recommendation, of course, and reflects the willingness of the applicant to work with the council to achieve an appropriate response to a fragile heritage building. However, the report recommendation does not support the very subdivisions which are the foundation of a redevelopment of the whole of the site. I need to stress that the construction of the dual occupancy and the Torrens title subdivisions necessary to create that separate parcel are an integral part of the development. The proposed development as a whole provides a greater opportunity for appropriate long-term management of an important heritage and residential resource. The part approval that's been recommended fails to recognise this connection and in fact operates as a complete refusal. The development simply can't progress without the dual occupancy in the subdivision proposed as part of the application. I need to point out that prior to the assessment report prepared by the council officers in March 21, a plan of proposed stratum subdivision was provided to council. I believe that's one of the plans that you have been given, that the Chair's just referred to. Then the council officers requested that in order to clarify how that was going to work, how the subdivision and the link between the basement parking and the zone boundary was operating. The stamped approved architectural plans from that approval in March 21 included on the site plan the proposed line of subdivision to create the two separate Torrens title lots, one for the boarding house and one for the dual occupancy. Subdivision's always been a part of the development, and this has been confirmed in the review process. Turning now to the clause 4.6 variations, which are critical to that question. Within the review documents, of course, the variation request, we believe, is a comprehensive document which addresses each of the elements that is required to be considered under clause 4.6. Makes the case that the proposed development is a positive response to the commonly held objective of rebuilding and restoring a listed heritage item whilst accommodating some transitional low-density residential development in this locality. And that's a very important part of the proposal in the transition between the larger scale boarding house building, which is in effect the restored original conda building, and the lower scale single dwellings that are compatible with the streetscape in this conservation area. Allowing the dual occupancy to proceed upon the separate parcel that is for all intents and purposes compliant with the objectives of the required minimum lot size for that type of development actually gives effect to the strategic objectives, and this is a valid, very strong environmental planning ground. On the contrary, unfortunately, the council assessment report, in our view, the analysis of the particular clause 4.6 variation requests is inadequate and insufficient. There doesn't appear to be any robust discussion as to why the planning arguments that the applicant has put forward in their submission in favour of the variations could not or should not be supported. There's little engagement with the reasons that we have put forward or acknowledgement of the objectives or the environmental planning grounds. So that's our view. In summary, therefore, we've arrived at a position now where there appears to be a consensus and support for the important conservation and restoration of the heritage item. But that outcome, however, is being placed in jeopardy through an unwillingness to accept what we believe is a fair and reasonable variation to the development standards that relate to subdivision and dual occupancy sizes. And if those variations were granted, it would have no adverse impact on the development's built form. It facilitates it. Therefore, as a way forward, based on what is in front of the panel in terms of the recommended conditions of approval, our recommendation to the panel is that, firstly, the clause 4.6 variations be supported because we believe they do have merit. And then, looking at the proposed conditions of consent, amend condition 2 to include the submitted plans of the proposed subdivisions for both the Torrens title and the stratum, and then amend or delete conditions 12 and 61, both of which seek site consolidation, and replace those with conditions that require the creation of the two Torrens title lots, the boarding house lot and the dual occupancy lot, and to put a time on that, probably prior to a CC. And a second condition, the registration of the necessary stratum subdivision prior to occupation certificate, because that's when the basement and the boarding house would be constructed, and that's when the stratum would be required. So in lieu of the two conditions that are currently in the draft set that require site consolidation, we would recommend or suggest that those two alternative conditions would allow the development as a whole to proceed, because that's critical And having read all of the report, like I said before, there does seem to be some support for the end product, the built form, the restoration of this item, but we need to overcome this problem with the subdivision and the creation of that separate Torrens title lot. Happy to try and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I might start. When I read through the documentation, I couldn't see anywhere that the original application, the SEE, the report, the documentation included subdivision as a component of the application, and this review includes two subdivisions. One is the dual occupancy subdivision and the stratum subdivision. So I'm wondering how we get over the issue in section 8.3 that we have to be satisfied that the review, that it's substantially the same application as was approved. That's a question of fact for us, but sure. do you want to address us on that?
Yeah, I'll try. Well, firstly, you're correct. The original development application was not described, or did not describe specifically the subdivision component of it. It was, I suppose, more a consequence of what we were doing. Subdivision, in that sense, isn't a land use. It's not in that we describe the development in terms of the land uses that were permissible and proposed, i.e. the boarding house and the dual occupancy. The subdivision was a consequence of that and a necessity to manage the development in the long run. As I pointed out, the council officers, in fact, prior to completing their assessment report for March 21, questioned that, and we provided at that point in time a copy of that stratum plan. And like I've also pointed out, the site plans prepared and submitted in the architectural drawing set showed the proposed realignment of the boundary. You can see that clearly on the plan where the 1, 2, 3 lots that make up the whole of the parcel are roughly 20 metres, 20 metres, 20 metres, and there's a clear line on proposed new boundary, 18 metres, which is the recognition of the need to shuffle that boundary. So in combination, that plan and the stratum plan that was submitted was the applicant's response to council's questions about, well, how is this working? And that's the answer. In my opinion, I suppose there would be nothing to stop the development approval being issued for boarding house and dual occupancy development, with the condition of consent that in fact works to enable that to happen in the appropriate fashion. As I've described here, the plans of subdivision that the council has available to it can be created, registered prior to other things happening. And subdivision can work that way, and a condition of consent can have that effect, requiring the applicant to do something. So the council has had information that's relevant to it to make that determination as to whether or not subdivision, as a result of the other decisions, is a reasonable outcome. We believe that it is, notwithstanding the fact that there's a slight variation required. Unfortunately, the recommendation at the moment is that that's not reasonable, but the importance to the project as a whole needs to be reconsidered, because it needs, we need to be able to separate the dual occupancy lot from the boarding house lot.
I guess that's probably where I jump in, and the proposition seems to be that the ability to sell off individually the dual occupancy is an important cash generator, or we could.
Well, there's two. If I just jump in and say before you've finished, yeah, 2 reasons. Absolutely, never. I wouldn't argue that ever. That's not a financial consideration. It's also a management consideration. There are 2 different uses. There's a boarding house which operates completely separately in terms of, it can't be subdivided. It's a different form of accommodation, and the 2 dual occs, which in effect are designed to be 2 cottages, like all the other cottages around. why would they, or how would that actually make sense to keep them together and manage in the long term? It doesn't.
Yeah.
And sorry, just to finish, sorry, but the council themselves have always seen that last lot as separate. I mean, yes, it's one heritage lot, but these two over here have got a completely different zoning to this one here. It just doesn't make sense to enforce a connection like that. It makes more sense to accept that they actually work better separately in the long run. But what we've done is put them forward so everyone can see how that can be done.
I guess where I get that, but I guess where I was going to go to is like what mechanism or what process is being put forward if we take the proposition that subdivision should proceed, that the dual occupancy subdivision just doesn't happen, and then all the restoration works to the former convent don't happen. Like what mechanism is there to preclude that? What suggestion has the applicant put forward to prevent that? Because like in the various submissions from the heritage and so forth, attempting to or seeking to engage clause 5.10. Well, okay, if you want to engage 5.10, what mechanism is being put forward that says, okay, yes, the beneficial outcome is put forward in terms of the restoration and rehabilitation of the former convent building is protected, and then the dual occupancy might happen.
Well, in a formal sense, we haven't put anything forward. Yeah. I just said then in my comments that perhaps there is an opportunity to change the two current conditions that relate to site consolidation to two different forms, different conditions, one that could relate to the Torrens title subdivision, one that could relate to the stratum. So I think to answer your question, Scott, it's probably at that the Torrens title perhaps stage where the council might seek to have more surety about what happens next or when things happen. And that would, in my opinion, that would be a fair and reasonable condition of the consent. And it's not unusual to have conditions of consent that require certain things to happen only if other things have happened, as prerequisites. And it might be that, that you link other things to a construction certificate being issued, or you certainly link things to an occupation certificate being. I haven't thought past what I'd said before, but I understand the necessity perhaps for having some safety net.
And is there any reason why the stratum would be 3 lots and not just 2? It just sort of seems strange that you'd have the basement on a separate stratum than the building and services.
Well, this gets a little bit tricky, I suppose, because you're talking about firstly creation of a Torrens subdivision of the land, right? So you've got a parcel and a parcel. And the stratum is layers. Yeah. So there is 3 layers, if you like. The layer that sits above the boarding house lot, and the layer that sits above the dual occupancy lot, and the layer that is the basement lot. So that's the stratum. I think that's the answer why there's 3.
Yeah, it seemed that you'd in terms of the stratum, it would just, the blue and the green would be the same, because like the dual occupancy lot has no, it's almost like an easement for occupation.
Yes, that one there, I agree with you, it's a little confusing, but if you look at the other 2 pages, those 2 pages align with my explanation of, a stratum here, there's a layer here, and then there's a layer underneath which covers the basement. And I think that's the work of the stratum, because you've got part of the basement extending into what is another lot.
Yeah, that's why it was just seemed a bit strange why you would have the 3rd lot and why the stratum lot wouldn't just be associated with the boarding house lot, and that's it. And there's no.
So we might just finish off this question about the sub. Did you have any questions about the subdivision?
Yeah, I did. As you've alluded to, Julie, I did read the original SEE, and there was definitely no mention of subdivision in that application.
No, that's correct.
And I did, so it's clear that it was added in only in this 82 review, 8.2 review.
It was certainly confirmed, yes, absolutely, and clarified that the council had raised that question in its assessment process of that DA before they reported it to council.
Right,
So,
but was it, but it didn't form part of the application?
no,
But
you
now
are
it
correct.
does.
You're correct. It's formally part of the application because that was a question that was requiring clarification and confirmation.
Right.
So the review process has allowed that to happen.
Okay, I guess I have a concern that the review process doesn't allow it to happen because it has to be substantially the same development.
Well, yes, but it also, the review process also allows the applicant to amend the application that was originally considered. And if you consider that an amendment to clarify or confirm that subdivision is a part of it or a consequence of it, I'm not too sure that's outside the scope of the review process.
So you're saying
my
it is
view.
substantially the same?
I would say absolutely it is, yes.
Okay, because I did listen to the, it was quite long, to the council meeting. I listened to the tapes of the council meeting.
Oh, last year's meeting.
Yeah, it's online.
Yes.
I found it. And you were asked a question in that meeting about the subdivision, and you said that there might be some future strata subdivision of the lots.
Well, probably stratum.
Oh, I thought you said strata. I thought it was heard.
Sorry,
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I was just interested.
I'm just
to know.
saying probably was stratum because that's the plan that was
Yeah.
asked or provided to the council because the council officers wanted some clarification of
Right.
what was happening there.
Okay. No, that's all my subdivision
Did you have any
questions.
questions?
Just a quickie. Why does the underground parking go under the subdivided lots? Why can't it go the other way?
I believe that's most likely to do with the sensitivity of the building itself, the heritage building.
Facade that's to be retained.
Yes, yes. So that goes that way rather than underneath the original portion of the building. Yeah.
So I had a question on another topic. Assuming that the repealed affordable rental housing SEP applies because of the savings provision, and I'm certainly comfortable with that.
Right.
Is the proposal prohibited under section 30 capital AA because it has more than 12 boarding rooms, because it extends onto the land zone R2? Have you considered that? So the car park extends into the R2.
The car park does,
Yeah.
but none of the boarding house does.
No, but the car park is part of the boarding house development. So I read 30AA that we're talking about the development. So the car park's not its own development. It's incidental to the boarding house.
Yeah,
So
incidental.
have you been asked that question, or it's just something that we were looking at in our deliberations, and it didn't
no.
seem. I mean, I was trying to work out what that third bullet point meant in the deferred commencement. The applicant resolves to council satisfaction the use of that portion of land located in the R2 zone, which is to be utilised by. I wasn't sure what that meant, but
I'm not too sure anybody was,
No.
to be honest.
But have you considered? So what's your response to the suggestion that it's actually prohibited in the
My response is I wouldn't agree that it's prohibited. The boarding house itself, I understand what you're saying about the car park being a component of, but the boarding house is wholly within the R3 zone, and I wouldn't have. My opinion would be that would not preclude car parking underneath it, even if it's used for that purpose, a boarding house. I must admit I've never had to turn my mind to what happens below the surface in terms of the zoning. Does it extend below ground? I mean, I don't know.
Well, if it was a residential flat building, the state
basement,
got a DA for a
basement.
residential flat building, and it was on its own site, and you had a car park servicing, there'd be no argument that we're talking about a residential flat building development, not a car park. So if the car park for the residential flat building extended onto an R2 zone,
underneath the
there
ground.
wouldn't be any argument about whether that was
Underneath the ground.
Yes,
Yes.
because it's still.
I don't know. Maybe I see what your point
Yeah.
is, but I'm not too sure I'd agree with there wouldn't be any argument. I think there is plenty of argument to be
I
had
think one
about
of the
that
planners
question.
raised that it wasn't, but I just wanted to know.
Oh, no, we haven't, and it's never been put.
No.
to us
Okay,
in those
well,
terms.
I apologise, but it's just
No, that's okay. It's a very interesting
something has to
point.
be-
I mean, I don't know if... Oh, look, I don't have
I mean,
a
if it was
answer.
found that that was a prohibition, how would you resolve it? Would you
Oh, well,
have to knock off some of the parking?
Well, that's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or knock off some of the parking and have a clause 4.6 about the number of units.
Well, whatever method
Yeah,
was available,
because-
but that would be certainly one solution to get rid of that problem, is just get rid of that part of the basement and confine it wholly to the R3 zone. But that to me seems a rather extreme way of overcoming what is not necessarily a problem, in my opinion. I mean, the development works at ground level, or and has respected the zone boundaries.
Well, you might be able to rely on clause 5.10.
That's the other way, I suppose, because it certainly
If it
facilitates
prohibits, yes.
the development. No, I don't think there's any argument about that, because without some development, the heritage item isn't looking to flash. So development in this sense is certainly facilitating its conservation. And that's the test for 510.
All right, I didn't have any other... Oh, I guess there was another thing, is that is there a timing issue here, because the 12-month... we won't
in
have
terms
the
of
power,
your
is that right?
determination...
We won't have the power to determine this.
That's correct.
You have lodged an appeal?
No,
Have
no.
you lodged an appeal?
No.
Because if you did that, that would...
We've done that before. We didn't really want to go back there
All right, I
again.
just wanted to raise that, okay. Did you have any other questions, Mr. Barnett?
No, that was my ones about
Did you have any other
that.
questions?
Yeah, just there was an issue in the original consent. A condition was put on limiting, and it was in the council officer's report as well at the time, saying that there should be no more than 48 occupants in the development.
Yes.
And then I think I read somewhere the reason was that in the original report was to maintain the amenity for the residents or something like that. When I had a look at your original SEC, it starts off by saying that there is 48 single rooms, but then later on in the SEC you clearly talk about them being double rooms and maybe two people or a couple have them. So my question is, was it always intended there'd be potentially double, all rooms would be double rooms? There'll be, the occupancy wouldn't be 48, it would potentially be 96.
The final occupancy could be anywhere between those numbers, because
Maximum occupancy.
the maximum the rooms are designed, they could accommodate, as I understand it, a double bed. What council, I think, sought to do with that condition was saying, you can't do that. Our view is, look, the council can't do that. So the final occupancy, the number of rooms we know, the capacity of each room could be one or two people. And so your occupancy rate, or your number of occupants, will be anywhere between 48 and 96.
Yeah. So my question was like, was it a misunderstanding of the original application that it was actually clearly for up to 96 people, or do you think the council was actually trying to limit the number of people?
That particular condition was one of a set of conditions that the council wanted to...
Or the council didn't add it, the officer
No,
added it.
that's right, sorry, the council officer added, or imposed, or included the condition that had a range of different things about the management and what should be provided or not provided, and that was one of them, which is, there's a cap, we're going to put a cap on you in terms of the occupancy rate. Well, our view has always been that we can't do that, and our view has always been that the occupancy, that the number of occupants will eventually be somewhere between 48 and 96, and that will vary over time.
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Did you have any other questions, Mr. Collins? And you have no questions, so I didn't have any other questions.
Thank you very
So,
much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mr. Lee. It certainly was a complicated scenario.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So thank you for coming on.
Thank
So
you.
that brings us to the end of the public meeting. It's now 4:10. As previously indicated, we'll now move into closed session and deliberate and return to the public meeting to announce our decisions, and that will be live streamed, and the minutes of the meeting will be placed on the council website within 2 business days. I think we'll probably be no more than an hour. Thank you.